Haga khatfratrik ujliyo arajar arpuar kadukan Meghalayan Age the store hapo jinkmi jonga dakti craft kalapelong ya ke program bansa Kynmaw to be remembered. Haga ni program na peniru ya Phlim kabayday ba jinglet Shim Bynta ki Khasi haga Thmabah ka Banyngkong kabalashna the one prank ki dingdo kabla I because we did not choose. But halor kani ka Phlim la pelongru ya ke jingimir jungbot ne panel discussion.
Di mentaka sngi kadai kadon ka screening jong film kadai ka film jong iba very own mo I nong shna film I nong ringdur ba wan prang ding do kani ru kadai ka story bansa jing Kynmaw kadai ka documentary because we did not choose ken kadai ka title jong ka movie jong I.
It is indeed an honor and I consider myself extremely lucky that a film that was made 5 years ago still finds relevance, and I do believe that it's a film that will constantly find relevance because of the subject matter that it addresses. I'm also extremely happy that I am joined today with Kong Alvrin Dakhar, who is the daughter of Primrose Katpho. Primrose Katpho, for those of you who are well aware of Khasi literature and culture, is an important writer, poet of the Khasis, who also served in the First World War from 1917. He went there as a clerk as opposed to the other laborers, and there are fascinating accounts that Kong Alvrin has in her possessions which throw light not just only the history of the Khasi people but also throws light with regards to the kind of relationship that Primrose Katpho also had with his father, Bulung Susutham, another important Khasi poet who has been able to take Khasi literature and poetry to different levels. I'm also joined for the discussion with Kong Patricia Mukim, who's the editor of the Shillong Times, and then there are other film critics and also writers who have done an extensive amount of research work on the subject matter that the film addresses. I'm extremely happy that the film is being played or is being screened at the store Meghalayan Age at the Rajiv Gandhi Crafts Emporium. I think a venture such as this present in Delhi will further create a sense of curiosity with regards to what happens in our state and the Northeast as a whole. It's an excellent venture on their part to showcase not just the film but also the different kinds of cultural activities, food, clothing that we find in the region, and I think this is an excellent step to bridge that connect between the mainland India and our state. Because what we have realized is that because the lack of available materials, or for that matter the lack of a curriculum even in schools or at the MBOs that stresses on subjects such as these which relate to identity or Khasi history, we find that intellectual void is being filled by people with certain kinds of vested interests. And in situations such as these, young people become cannon fodder, or they become people to carry out all of their misleading agendas. So I feel that it's only education and a certain desire of wanting to know where you come from and your identity that will help us understand not just our past, our present, but will also facilitate our understanding of where the future is supposed to take us to. It is important that some of these subject matters that pertain especially to the history of our state be included in a certain kind of a curriculum, so that we are also proud to tell to the world that we also had part, or we also had a certain amount of contribution with regards to these events that have taken place in the world. I also believe that it is only through community participation, in the sense that being able to communicate your ideas, your histories, your culture, your identity within the community, that will enable us to solidify our identity further. Because if that doesn't happen, then society becomes fragmented based on different people's personal and political aspirations.
Swaban sedang berpeni ya ke Phlim ne ke screening la penkop buramru ya ke kun siu try jong umelong susutham Kong Alvrin Dakhar ke badai ru ke chairperson ke belasong thai jong ke MPSC ke kun jong ba Primrose Katpho ubadai wai ni Khasi ubaladon Bynta ha ke Thmabah ke Banyngkong.
I'd like to call Bynta to please felicitate Kong Alvrin. Come.
you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon, this late afternoon. And before I give a short speech, I would like to greet you in Khasi, Kublai. Kublai, we use it for several occasions, and it has a lot of meanings. When we meet someone, we say Kublai. When we say thank you, we say Kublai. When we say good night, we say Kublai. And then when we bow to each other, we say Kublai. It has a very, very significant meaning because it comes from the word Kublai, which means God bless you. So when we greet you, we greet with our blessings to each one of you. So Kublai to each one of you.
Hakajing cica kajing ciminta jonga karong kajing day ba kajing penmi ka art film kajong iwan prang. Nama ila ban promote yaki chat bendio rajong kam tam ki pateng bela le no kam tam i kam chon bha yaki bela yakatma First World War ka spas nyam ka ba kapra. Di ila kli subuh ngam da day ka student of history day ka bangala ban dia jing tip kalong dong ba kajing thoi parat jongai parat susu. Saya papa jangan para Primrose Katpo, nama ikpa jangan ru ide i Mr. Primrose Katpo, ikut dia para susu tam, but haka bidang dap kat fresh nem di school, but kita kapor kilawan kini balik cawa Thmabah sa France, kiwan pai kita kali bokor kejongki, but kini beliau kilong kiba keluar museum, makia tu kejong Shim jongki, kejong Shim kejongki adventure kejongki baru kau kia tu kita kena school. Kepada government high school, but kan ia kena pun ketik ia kejeng buat terpekat dengan dia, nama ki para dok perasnam jengi kem pat jual mi cebas dong, dai ka menong penon ketian pareng ka experience, baka adventure kejeng ki ke baki mat kiban dia tu ki para lok, but kan ia kena ketak subuh ni kini kejeng buat terpekat dengan kena asamla, kemudian pedang song school, kemudian ke baklam song school. Kita kiri kia kuat bandai lang sekat Thmabah. Hakajing saya kajing kuat jongki imbat kalong ba kenya iya ka percaya ke Thmabah. Jangan ada kajong kari di badan dan pedang ki bampat poi ta go hati ro. Bat ki kuat banyo mai kata ka experience kajing Shim kajong kita beri belalai no. Makanya tip lem. Tikini hapok ka jingalam kajong headmaster di school. Usap Davis bat imam kila yarap mungkin yo bandai lem. Kita nak kapor kemba sapu mut tamik ai. Basong school baklem song school. Bat kini ki ami lang na Shillong. Kajing song shit kajing kemen kajong ki. Bat kilet nungkong kilet bet sa madras. Kilet sa kata school ke overseas training school. Bakin yo jing hikai hang tai ke disiplin. Bat kuno banang ban grandparent. Ban tuap ban grandparent. Kila yo ke training hang ta. Bat kila Shong lang baru hang tak bialik lang, dia kenduk equip adwaki para lok pun ke wei jong ki chinong jong hari India. Bagi la yo ka jing Shim ke Thmabah ke bayi lang sa lang bat gitu. Dai ke baslusi ke long ba i wei naki kat kum ke jing tho ji papa ju yang Shim kata. Bai wei na pedang jong ki ba keteng ba klit. Msum ai ke ka jai dai ba klit ila klan no madras. Bala tiap dang duromi i madras. Dai kini kila don ha kata ka overseas training school. Baru Sep Davis bakal mem ke jong kila let no ki endo anak kini ki kena baru asal pung tam ha ke jing penyat kita ki officer jong kini ke school ban Shim ban penpek yaki ban hikai yaki ba ke jing hikai hang ti ro kalong kam tam ya ke disiplin kita aktif ke kam sipai bat kum ju ru banang ya ketian pareng kini keren begini sabiet ya begini keren bagi officer ke bang tu ti papa jong apa ilek kum uklak hak ami. Baik leo training nang tu, baik dia mi lang kata kapor, dia mi na madras. Saya lapet, orang kerja ngam tiup kata kerja kadang don dekat kum jing toy papa orang begini na saya lapet. Kilek chua, kia song lang madras, kimi nang tu kilek cha Pune. Na Pune kilek cha Bombay. But dakalieng pat kilek kalieng ke bekerja ke Agra. Takalieng bat hak takalieng ki ong pidan ki hazar ngot ki beri ke balik nak keleng dari India ke bawan bat ki mi lang
Hakane ke program lawan banyak sementara da kinong mikmat kabakan tup ya ke isu maru kabade ka Director Arts and Culture Exchange Japan Foundation ka Prutha Narke kabade ka Deputy Cultural Attaché jong ka French Institute of India ka Priyanchi Mehta kabade ka Project Manager jong ka French Institute of India padu Hanpin Huang ubade Assistant Representative jong ka Taipei Economic and Cultural Center in India. Ibla ajing ero ya kene Phlim pat kumjuru ya Meghalayan Age the store. Hanya ngijing pini pait ba ya Phlim jong ba wan prang la dong ngijing peliu jungbot halo kamat jong Phlim kabalai Shim Bynta tegi katu kat ni kidu Shampang ba kentobi kong patusha mukim pat mashri paderu ka editor jong Shillong Times ka Radhika Singha retired professor Jawaharlal Nehru University Utpal Borpujari unongsna Phlim belayo National Award kong Alvin di Dakar pada samla wan prang ke dengdo ubere unang pulmi ya kene Phlim.
How you have expanded it into from being merely just a documentation of the story of the First World War into a whole kind of documentation of the social history of the whole period. So I would like to ask you how you kind of structured this film, how you thought about that aspect that you have brought up certain very minute things which won't be observed by an outsider maybe, that like how the memorials have negated the names of certain communities and various places like in Shillong and in Phlim, and so would you like to tell us about how you kind of thought of structuring the whole film and what were the aspects you thought of, including going beyond the core subject?
At the very early stages of the film, wrote back with a lot of material as far as the war is concerned. Her book is also available here this evening, The Police Great War. I think we'll probably have asked quite a few things in that one question, and I'll see if I can I'll try to answer all of them. How did it start? Well, the film before this was called Where the Clouds Met, which is also something that looked at what is this whole question of Khasi identity, what is this whole idea of purity, if there ever existed one, looking at how borders are man-made and how emotions and culture transcend these geographic boundaries. And then I was looking at the research material that I had gathered then, and I noticed that there was quite a few, or rather a huge volume of publications that came out in the early 1900s. And then I suddenly realized that all of this material was being published from one publishing house, which was Ri Khasi Press, that was set up in 1896. And it was the first publishing house in that region. So, of course, like people who were educated, the missionaries had done their fair bit. But there's a different school of thought that also exists in Shillong, which was largely informed by Brahmo Samaj activities, and they set up this printing press. But at the same time was also printing publications on behalf of the Welsh Presbyterian Church. So when the First World War started, they sort of perhaps found themselves in a bit of a fix, with regards to business. Do they carry on in their business pursuits, or do they cater to the biggest customer that they had? And I think that must have resulted in quite a few discussions within the business setup. But it was also a point of time when, like I said in the beginning of the film, a lot of people, a lot of tribal Khasis, or a lot of people from that region wanted to sort of really assert their identity through writing. The act of writing became something extremely significant for people to assert themselves. And of course, like any kind of nationalist movement always starts with a certain kind of a language genesis, so to say. And then, I honestly found most of the stories that I arrived at in very unconventional circumstances, and not the traditional research method of going to the archive. It would be in like places where a funeral house, so people would sit down and share stories, and then oh wow, okay, that's interesting, and then they would give me numbers, and then I'd call them up, and then suddenly realize, wow, like there's so much oral history and testimonies that existed, and which perhaps might not sit in well with the idea of evidence. But I found those stories fascinating, and realized that, hang on, where are these stories coming from? Because there are only 67 people out there. And I suddenly realized there were many, many more people who were recruited. With regards to why those other names have been left out, the writing of history is always a power contestation. Who gets to tell that history at what point of time, to what effect, is something that we've seen has been used by the powers that be to a certain particular kind of an ideology forward. There are as many histories as the number of people that exist in this world. And I think that, for me, this is my understanding of that event that had taken place at one point of time in the Khasi Jaintia Hills.
Many of the oral histories actually capture a community's, traditions, their society, their folk traditions, their food habits, and also their social practices, and which if not recorded well, they vanish after a generation. Like I felt when Kong Algarin was speaking today, that itself is a part of oral history. What she was saying is like, if we actually record what she speaks, it will become a huge documentation of a huge period of, the Khasi society and of Meghalaya. Professor Singha, you have written the book about the the so-called natives who were sent to do the labor work during the First World War. What is your impression about the film, first of all, and secondly, do you think there is another book which can come as a sequel to this, because there was another Second World War where again a lot of Indians were conscripted, and Second World War of course took place within India also, where a lot of people were left wondering why this war is being fought in my backyard. I mean, we have nothing to do with either side.
So what I have to say is that there are many more books to be written, and not only on World War II but also on World War I. Because remember that I'm a historian who came to know of even the geography of the Northeast. I've never been there. It's been through two of my first students from that region, Rinku Arda Pegu and Lipokoma Zichu. So it's through them that actually I got interested in a region which I unfortunately haven't even visited. I have barely scratched the surface, and there's going to be much richer work coming out from people who know the language and who are from that region. And I think this film is one of those ways of deepening that story. Now, what I loved about the film was the careful attentiveness to how the world came to the doorstep of Khasis before the Khasis went out to France. Because you had a printing press and you had an editor who was writing critical petitions all the time, and this editor was adding up the number of Germans who had been killed and saying, well, this doesn't add up. And you had that same kind of thing happening all over India, that on the one hand you had these expressions of loyalty, on the other hand there was this bit of skepticism, this bit of sly satisfaction that the British were finally getting it. For example, there was a famous Urdu couplet which said, "Kadam German ki, Fateh English, Kadam English German ki बढ़ती है, Fateh English ki होती है." We keep hearing about English victories, but the Germans seem to be advancing and advancing, So, you find the same kind of thing being expressed by somebody in Shillong and somebody, in northern India. So I also love the way in which music and the tonic solfa notation came into the film, because what we have is the tonic solfa notation was the product of a movement towards congregational music which challenged existing church practices. The congregational music, was looked at with suspicion by people sometimes. They thought it detracted from the solemnity of church music. And in a sense, the Khasi Hills, the Rashai Hills, these were the sites from which people embraced congregational music and made it acceptable worldwide. And the tonic solfa notation also allowed people who did not know how to read or write, nevertheless to follow a tune. So that was wonderful. I also really liked Alvarine's reference to her father writing about what it meant for him to shift from the pen which you dipped in ink to the fountain pen. Here is something which we all read and write all the time. So in this we saw, we saw the pen which you dipped, we saw the fountain pen, and we saw the typewriter. So I love the way in which this flow of media suffused the film and linked it together. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. But I think I would like to pass the mic on to Patricia.
This point of the music of the film is you actually noticed the very fine point of the film actually. And the credit goes to Anfrang, who himself is an accomplished musician. Coming to this film and juxtaposing it with the kind of issues that happen in the society in Meghalaya specifically, and also in the rest of the Northeast, the question of this insider outsider, that question that continues to linger. How do you think this kind of films, this kind of audiovisual projects can help in documenting as well as removing those barriers and misconceptions?
At the outset, I have to thank Anfrang for producing such a wonderful documentary, something that I, as a student of history, missed out in college because we didn't know anything about this part of our history. And thank you to the team. What is that called? Dactygraph. Sorry, Rita and Gopal. I didn't pay attention to that name. Thank you for bringing us here. And it was kind of very mind-blowing, this film, because I particularly took offense to the words of that contractor who said, why should we remember them? They went and fought for somebody else. That was very crude. But then that's the reality. It is a reality, and the othering continues. The other can never do good. The other is always wrong. If I'm not getting a job, it's because of the other. So this is something that's a very painful part of our history. I don't know when we will ever see the light of day, when there will ever be acceptance. We are fighting at all levels, emotional levels, physical levels. We're very fond of the word illegal migrants. We think they're taking away everything. And the term illegal migrant came in because borders were redrawn. When we were not part of the great continent of India or subcontinent of India, we were different people. I mean, we were the others. We were the others, or I don't know. It's the insider-outsider complexities will continue to haunt us, I feel, because there are too few people who are trying to, create this bond of unity, and because it serves a political purpose. Every time elections come near, now we're heading for elections in 2023. This will come up, this will fire up, and emotions will be fired up on the basis of the outsider. Then you'll hear again loud cries for inner line permit. In Manipur you already have it, and it came on the eve of elections. I think we might be the next state to get it, and I don't know how we're going to deal with it, because on the one hand you have severe unemployment, you need people to come in, especially from the IT industry. We have the capacity, we have the human resource, but we don't have the willingness to allow these to grow. So this film is actually a reminder of all that happened since 1979, when we had violence, when we had the ethnic conflicts, which continued until the 90s. After that we had militancy, and now we have a subtle kind of othering. But of course, it will reach a crescendo when we come closer to the elections. So this film, I think, when you talk of tonic sulfur, I must say that I'm a Catholic, so we've never gotten into this whole, it's the Presbyterians who they are the ones who are taught this tonic sulfur, and they're very proud about it. I think the Catholics sang in a different tone, which is, I don't know what, but it was, and for the longest time, we were not allowed to read the Bible because we were taught that we would misinterpret it. So there is a divide there as well. There is a divide between Christians and so-called indigenous faith people, and I'm sorry to say this, but in the recent times, it's coming up very well, because at one time I remember, if you're a member of the Khasi, which is indigenous faith, it wasn't institutionalized. But today, it's become a very inward-looking thing. Only people of that particular faith are usually invited for the dances. And I always take offense to that, because I say I'm a Khasi as much as the Khasi people. Just because I was baptized when I was 1 year old, so I could not choose, I did not choose. So why am I excluded from the Khasi way of life? So this film actually, for me, it's kind of, it really assaults my senses, because I think there are many issues that we have to resolve as a community. We really have to look inside. And then you haven't shown this film in Shillong.
I have twice.
Twice?
At Khasi National Darbar, that's the September. Yeah.
Okay. And what was the reaction?
I mean, I don't want to speak about any kind of. There's no post-colonial understanding of religion in our state. There's not been an attempt to look at the colonization alongside the implications of religion within those period of time. So when I streamed the film, I suppose there was a lot to process and digest. There was I really couldn't gauge what the response was, to be honest, but I think a subject such as this to be discussed in Shillong is quite difficult. Somehow or the other, everyone is related to everyone. You don't want to step on anyone's toes. But I don't want to start.
So, like Kong said, I didn't choose. The name itself says, because we didn't choose.
Yeah, but that's a lady hospital.
I know, but that's the story of many of the things we face in our region, actually. So,
Utpal, can I also say something? See, the British used this ruse of religion to entice people to join, and they also, of course, threw the bait of employment and getting people out of the drudgery of farm work. But then there were also a lot of non-Christians that joined, and they became faceless, anonymous. It's so sad, yeah? I mean, just think of so many people dying in that cold and dreadful atmosphere over there, and we don't even know who they are. And least of all, we won't even pay respects to them. In Garo Hills, as Dr. Bynta says, they have a kind of a show. They observe at least Garo Labor Day 4. But as he says, we do it just like we do Khasi Jaintia or whatever, without any kind of reverence or respect for what those people stood for.
First of all, thank you to our panelists, to One Prang for the documentary, the tourism department, the guests who made it here, and to Dr. Crafts for organizing pretty much everything from start to finish. We do have copies of Anne-Marine's book of letters and Dr. Radhika's book. If you could kindly sign them, I'm sure there would be many takers for it.